Every little thing about you can be a weapon if you're clever enough. Courtney Summers, Sadie. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. Regular contributor Aamer Khan is joining me. Aamer, today we're reviewing Sadie by Courtney Summers, which is a book that came out, I think 2018. And normally we wouldn't review something that came out 7 years ago, but I thought it was super worthwhile to make this exception because this is one of those books that's very much an audiobook experience with the production and the way it's put together. It was meant to be an audiobook. Do you want to take it from here? Maybe give us a bit of a synopsis as to what this thing is all about before we get into our review?
Sure. Actually, I came across this book because it was the author of the previous book that we reviewed. I hope this finds you well. That suggested to go into this book, and what she said about it was basically that it's one of the first books to actually embed a podcast into an audiobook.
Yeah.
And that really piqued my interest in terms of how that would be. Then I started looking at Courtney Summers in terms of an author, and she seems to write really interesting sort of mystery and thriller novels. So I'm like, all right, let me go and pick this up. But as you said, very audio rich. I didn't know really what to expect in terms of a podcast being embedded into a book, but it's done in a very documentary style throughout the entire book. So
at least the podcast section.
The podcast section, as well as even the narration, right? I mean, aside from the Sadie parts, it almost feels like you're watching TV documentary, right? In terms of the sound quality and the way that you're sort of led through all the plot points.
So in terms of plot, what can people expect?
So this is a book about missing girls. I mean, that's, it's classified as young adult, but as I was commenting to someone else the other day, it's more on the adult side of young adult. I mean, I wouldn't put it in a 12 or 13-year-old's hands.
It's an old young adult book, an OYA.
Yeah, I'd put it at the same sort of level as Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I mean, you don't want somebody too young to read that, and it's the same story here. So it's about missing girls. There's and missing girls who are particularly from a poor and rural part of the United States. And the story sort of starts with this documentary maker pondering why he would actually take the time to look into this story because it's so common. And that sets up the novel really nicely in terms of looking into these girls and why they were missing and why he goes on the journey of actually trying to follow what's going on. So every other chapter is pretty much a Sadie, who is one of the missing girls, and her journey as to why she ran away, while the main storyline is of this documentary maker basically figuring out where she went and why she ran away.
And it's kind of split into two points of views. One of them is from Sadie, one of the girls that's gone missing. You're trying to figure out where she's been, but you get her perspective because basically she runs away from home to go and try to kill a guy that abused and what she thinks is the guy who ended up killing her sister, Maddie. So she's basically on a manhunt. She's like a 17-year-old on a manhunt. It's kind of bleak. And then the other half of the book follows this podcaster, this radio guy who's kind of doing a true crime type thing, exploring the disappearance of these two girls. So there's kind of like a race against time to see if he can catch up to her. And what you see happen is Sadie will do something at a motel, for example, and then the next chapter is going to be the podcaster talking to the owner of the hotel and seeing what's going on. Did you see this girl and stuff like that? So you kind of get both perspectives. The audio production is excellent, and I think is one of the high points of this book, especially as an audiobook. Do you want to touch on that, what you liked about it? Because you were the one that brought this up to me.
I did, and it's the audio production as well as the narration, right? I mean, all the audio quality parts of this book are top quality, right? I mean, you get Sadie's voice, you get the documentary person's voice, you get an embedded podcast, which sounds like a podcast, and then there's parts of the book where he's interviewing people for either the podcast or just interviewing people in general. and you can hear the background noise that's associated with what they're doing. So if they're in the kitchen, you can hear a fridge close and things like that. Or if you're there in a restaurant, you hear the background noise of forks and knives and glasses and things. So it's a very real sounding fictional book.
Yeah, like when you're listening to that podcast, it really sounds like you're just listening to a podcast. So it's like you're alternating between like your traditional audiobook and a podcast.
And I think the other standout part of this book is the way the author really knows pacing. I think the pacing of this book is excellent in terms of bringing up, you call books thrillers. I call this one a spine chiller or spine tingler, because Courtney Summers does a fantastic job of basically having that sort of neck and neck pacing as you were describing earlier, in terms of, Sadie is going and doing something, and then this guy sort of this documentary maker has to catch up and try to figure things out. But she never reveals too much too soon or too early. And then there's twists along the way too, in terms of major points in the plot lines and major points in the lives of these two girls. And there's points where you really don't see it coming, in terms of a postcard, like the postcard situation and some of the other ones. It's hard to talk about this book without spoilers, to be honest.
Yeah, I lost Aamer. He'll come back. Aamer, we lost you for the last 10 seconds.
Where'd you lose me? Oh, it told to cut out now.
Pause the timer.
Okay, I think I'm back now.
Yeah, it sounds like you're back. We'll give it 10 seconds to stabilize.
Okay, where did you lose me?
You were talking about the pacing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you can start from your comments on the pacing.
Okay. Shall I? Okay. So, as Jacob, you alluded earlier, pacing is, or as I would like to say, pacing is excellent with this book. As you were saying earlier, the chapters are sort of neck and neck in terms of Sadie doing something and then the documentary maker following up and trying to find things out that way. Courtney Summers does a fantastic job of not revealing anything too early or too soon, and then having twists where you don't expect them, but they're really major parts of these girls' lives. It's very difficult to talk about this book without giving spoilers away, but things like, the postcard that the absent mother sends to these girls is an example of sort of the twists that can be provided, or things like that. The other part of this book, which I really like, is it's a very truth-telling book. It's raw without being too detailed or too gruesome, which is why I think it's classified as young adult. Would you agree with me on that one, Jacob? I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of underlying truths that sort of come out in terms of the reality of the world.
It's not gratuitous in its violence and bleakness in any way. It does show you what's there, but it doesn't like linger on it in any way. Like, that it's there. And something that it does that I do appreciate, it kind of show like the underbelly of middle America, which I mean, to not mince words, like it's a story of like the white trailer trash, which is kind of funny. I do kind of like that setting. But if I can get into this, Aamer, maybe go into spoilers a little bit.
Sure.
I did not vibe with this book at all. Great audio experience, but it did one of the worst things a book can do, and that's be boring. You called it a spine tingler.
I didn't find it boring at all.
My spine is thoroughly untingled. And I think part of the reason is that, yes, those chapters between the podcasts and Sadie, the traditional audiobook portions, were like neck and neck, and they all followed each other. It seemed like there was a lot of information that was kind of redundant. Like, there was something infuriating about sort of understanding what Sadie was doing and then having a podcaster not know what was going on and then asking people around, like, what's going on, even though you as a reader have a pretty damn good hunch what's going on. It felt like I was reading redundant information regularly. And I'll add that this book also had a problem of show, don't tell. That's something you often hear about movies, but I think it does apply in books as well to make people come to the conclusion. It's said often that Maddie and Sadie had an interesting relationship. They were two young sisters, And Sadie saw herself as like a mother to Maddie because they were both abused. And that Maddie, and then Sadie wanted to protect Maddie growing up. Maddie was the younger one.
Yeah.
And
then they had an absent mother too.
Yes, exactly. But it was just said over and over by characters. Like, oh yeah, Sadie saw Maddie as her little sister. It didn't let you come to that conclusion like
I can see
like
that.
A good author would. Like, I was just continuously frustrated by this book, but the worst thing it did was be unsuspenseful and kind of boring. Like, things would happen and I would just be like, meh, I'm not impressed. I don't know if this is just me not being super into true crime or was it something about this back and forth thing. I almost wish that it was exclusively the podcast portion. If it was like a fake true crime story. But like, I always disregard reviews that complain about a book because of what it wasn't. I think in this case, I just couldn't get into it. It's not that deep. It did not do it for me.
That's interesting. I'm curious what you would think of a book like Demon Copperhead, which is sort of a male perspective on poor America and growing up in that environment. It's a longer book and it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, but it shares similar traits in terms of, the character just keeps chugging along and there's things that are more obvious. But I agree with you. There is some repetition with regards to like the relationships and the sisters.
Just me. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, I had very little to complain about at the end of this book. I really enjoyed this book. And I thought it did a good job of sort of offering different perspectives at different times, but not beating them to death. And maybe those should have been more explored for readers like yourself. I mean, like, like the pseudo grandmother character. I mean, we're introduced to her at the beginning and we think, oh, she's looking out for these girls and all that. But when the mother comes back, you're not so sure that she was, like the saintly character.
There seems to be a decent amount of stuff that was unexplored, right? And this is a pretty short book. And I get the vibe that this is one of those books that was heavily edited. That's just my hunch. What do you think?
No, I got the impression that the author wanted to move the story along and didn't want to get too bogged down with too many things. I think that the story was designed to be around Sadie, and there were designed to be pieces missing because this book was about a missing girl, and we may not know everything. I think was the underlying sort of theme to this book in terms of we may not know everything. So I can see this book being expanded out, but I think what the author was going for, and this is just a guess on my part, would be that this book is about missing girls, and that although we have this podcaster running around and picking up clues, not everything is going to be solved, and you're not going to know everything.
It's kind of like any true crime case, right? There is always going to be some holes to fill. It's never going to be fully laid out to you what happened here. It is kind of interesting to have a missing person story, but you get the perspective of the missing person. Not the whole story, but a very decent chunk.
A decent chunk, and I think the part that stands out, aside from the audio production quality, is just the ingenuity that she shows at the age of 16. Right? I mean, she's not overly educated. She wasn't, brought up in a traditional suburban household or whatever, but she has to use, her grit and whatever wits she's got to go on her mission. And, everything from, her social engineering to get into a friend circle to how she buys a car at the beginning. I mean, you really feel for the character. And I think that is really what sold it for me for this book.
Yeah, they mention over and over again, just how dirty she is and just how destitute and poor she is.
Yeah.
And how she's like hungry and poor. Like she doesn't have any money going anywhere. And her whole mission is just to go and kill a guy.
Yeah.
And you can feel that hatred in there.
You can feel the hatred and the determination too, right? I mean, there's parts where they talk about her growing up and, somebody takes her to the hospital and she doesn't talk to that person for a week, right? Because she didn't want to go to the hospital, even though it probably saved her life. but you see a lot of grit and determination in her character as well.
You didn't find it boring at all?
No, I was at the edge of my seat most of the book. I wanted to know what was going on.
I'm baffled as to how we both have pretty similar taste in books.
We do.
Both
we
had
do.
such like I rated this a 2 out of 5 on Goodreads.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Like we really have polar opposite opinions of this thing. I don't know what listeners are supposed to make of that. Please let us know your thoughts, guys.
Yeah, they'll have to pick it up and find out. I mean, I think because it's also a short book, and I typically have quite a bit of patience for books. I mean, if it was a 20 hours and this was the storyline, I'd probably be frustrated. But I mean, I think when it's under a 9-hour book, the story moves along. There's some repetition, but you're at least I was entertained throughout the book. But
yeah, it was a mercifully short book, thankfully.
It's a toss up.
It was about 7 hours, by the way, just a little over 7 hours. Aamer, thank you so much for this review. Like I said, 2 out of 5 stars for me. What do you give it?
I put it a 4. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
That's a respectable 3 out of 5. That was average. That was our review of Sadie by Courtney Summers. I'm with regular contributor Aamer Khan right now, and Aamer, you prepared a trivia game out of the blue that really caught me off guard, and I have no clue what to expect. We have some time here. You want to take it over? Take it from here, Game Master?
Sure. I thought it'd be fun to just go over a couple of interesting books in a different way. We all love the rapid fire review, but I thought this trivia game would be an interesting way to go through some of the books that I've come across in my book journey. So there's only a few questions, and it's more for fun than anything else. This is not sort of a hard quiz thing. It's much more for fun than anything
There's
else.
nothing on the line?
Nothing on the line, and no expectation as for people to actually know the answers. This is more for fun and to talk about books in a different sort of way. So
you have 7 questions. What do you consider as a passing grade?
Again, like I said, this is just for fun, so I won't be keeping score. We'll just go question by question and do it that way. So question number 1, Fowl Play is a book. The title is spelled Fowl, Fowl Play. And all the questions are multiple choice. And which author wrote Fowl Play? I'll give you a hint that the book is about a local news anchor that's replaced by a chicken. An actual live chicken. So hence the title, Fowl Play. Answer option A is Gordon Korman. Option B is Janet Ivanovich. Megan Quinn is the third. Nora Roberts is the fourth. So A, B, C, and
I'm gonna say C, Megan Quinn.
I'm sorry. The answer is Janet Ivanovich. Although Gordon Korman did have a book called The Chicken Can't Skate or Chicken Doesn't Skate.
Okay, chicken related. Okay, see, you threw me off base here.
But Janet Ivanovich's book is just a really lighthearted rom-com, as you can imagine, about a local news anchor who's replaced by a chicken. But light and
Fowl. What does fowl mean? Fowl. Is it a baby chicken? No. What is a fowl?
A fowl is a type of chicken, yes. Fowl
a type of chicken. Oh, okay. I'm just familiar with the type that you eat.
Classification, yes. Fowl, type of bird, basically.
Okay, not off to a good start. What's number 2?
Number 2 is a much more serious book. It's called The Queen of Paris. And the question is, what is the Queen of Paris about? What's the synopsis? So we have some answer options here, 3 of them. Option A is the life and times of French fashion model Laetitia Casta. B is the story of Celine Dion, who does not need any explanation. Or C, the story of Coco Chanel.
It's definitely not B. I know that Celine Dion sang on top of the Eiffel Tower for the Olympics in 2024. That doesn't mean she was the queen of France for anything more than 10 minutes. It has to be A. Oh my God.
I'm sorry. It's
Coco Chanel.
Times of Coco Chanel. Yeah, fashion icon, the Queen of Paris. Laetitia Casta is a French model, but I don't know if she even has a memoir. It was an excellent book. I reviewed it on Audiobook Review a few weeks ago, but It's basically a historical, slightly fictionalized account of Coco Chanel, but done in a very realistic way. So an excellent novel, Queen of Paris.
Okay, yo, this trivia game is like a stealthy recommendation list. This is really good, dude.
It is.
All right, number 3.
I thought I'd be a little sneaky today. The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes is a book. What is it about? A, how David Foster discovered famous singers. B, the story of how Texas Rangers got their stars. C, the story of female librarians on horseback. Or D, the story of female astronomers in ancient Greece.
I'm saying D, ancient astronomers.
Good guess, but no. It's actually also a slightly sneaky question because it is female librarians on horseback.
The Giver of Stars. I guess sometimes the title is like a metaphor, an allegory or something.
Yeah,
it's not so literal.
This one was really hard. I would never have guessed the book was actually about that, but it was a sort of a strange initiative by Eleanor Roosevelt to make America more literate back in her time. So there was an actual federal grant to basically hire female librarians on horseback to bring books to rural areas in America where cars didn't go.
Jeez.
Also, I think narrated by our favorite narrator, Julia Whelan. So,
shout out. She gets so much love on the show. Next question.
The Rose Code by Kate Quinn is about what? It's a romance novel with a backdrop of a greenhouse, a spy thriller set in Rose's France, a novel about female code breakers during the Second World War, or D, a novel about females, Italian spies in the Second World War.
3 female code breakers in the Second World War. I know that was a thing. Yes! Nice. Finally, was it a good book?
Correct. It is about female code breakers in the Second World War in Britain. Fun fact, they used to call it BP because it also shared the same name as British Petroleum, so it was double coded for those people that worked there. Worked at BP and everybody thought it was British Petroleum, but it was actually Park, which is where they used to do the code breaking.
Okay.
Also, Kate Quinn is also the same author as Diamond Eye, which was about a Russian female sniper that comes to the U.S. and becomes friends with Eleanor Roosevelt from that time period.
Eleanor Roosevelt getting involved with everything, eh?
Yeah.
Moving on.
Question number 5. The Husband Trap by Tracy Ann Warren is a historical novel set in Regency, England, in Victorian times, I assume. In The Husband Trap, what is the trap? First option is A, the bride actually sends her twin sister instead of herself to get married to the guy. The couple fall in love when the wife gets caught in a snowstorm and has no other option but to take refuge in the man's house. The groom is given the choice of prison or marrying the guy's daughter after he loses a game of cards. Or D, how a bride catches her husband in a lie that he is actually rich and not poor.
I feel like this whole trivia game is a trap. I have to say A, the bride sends her twin sister.
Yes, you got that one.
That's
right.
it? Yeah, okay, that sounds good. Okay,
Well done.
not too chat. What am I?
Fun
2 for 5 right now.
Fun fact is, though, that all of those are Tracy Ann Warren books. All the answers. All the answers. Yeah.
Next.
There's a husband trap, there's a wife trap, there's all sorts of books, but yeah. Number 6 in Elude, which is a elite mafia series book, which I've reviewed before. It's mafia romance, I guess would be the easiest way to describe that character. The wife wakes up her husband the first day by doing what? Option A is playing Van Halen on all the house speakers. B, fitting him with cement shoes. Filling his Italian loafers with wedding cake. Or banging pots and pans with a baseball bat to wake him up.
I feel like 3, filling the loafers with cake isn't exactly the most disruptive thing. Cement shoes is too stereotypically Italian. It has to be A, playing Van Halen.
No, Sorry. You eliminated almost all the choices, but it was actually D. Yes, it was a classic baseball bat on the pots and pans to wake him up in the morning the day after the wedding. So Elude is actually an interesting and my favorite one out of the Elite series. And I've asked you to read the synopsis for this particular book because it's one of the most interesting synopses I've ever seen on Sela in terms of a book. So I'll let you do that.
Whoever wrote the synopsis for this book, Elude, deserves a raise because they basically wrote a poem. Listen to this. 24 hours before we were to be married, I offered to shoot her. 10 hours before our wedding, I made a mockery of her dying wish. 5 hours before we were going to say our vows, I promised I would never love her. 1 hour before I said I do, I vowed I'd never shed a tear over her death. But the minute we were pronounced man and wife, I knew I'd only use my gun to protect her. I'd give my life for hers. I'd cry, and I would most definitely lose myself to a dying girl, a girl who by all accounts should have never been mine in the first place. I always believed the mafia would be my endgame, poisoning my heart while it claimed my soul. I never could have imagined it would have been my redemption, or the beginning of something beautiful, the beginning of her, the end of us. That was the most high effort synopsis I have ever seen.
Yeah, usually I have issues with Sela synopsis in terms of summaries, but this one I was like, wow, that's
kind of awesome.
It's kind of awesome, and it really
it
intrigues you almost in every sentence of that synopsis, and you okay, got to read this book now. So,
all right, you have one more question here.
I have one more question, and it is also a fun one. In the book, The Capital of Dreams, the main character has an animal friend throughout the book. What animal is her friend? Is it A, a canary, B, a goose, C, a dog, D, a cat?
It has to be a canary because there's like that metaphor of the canary in the coal mine. That seems like something an author would do. Oh, no. Okay, well,
close, but it's a very...
I overthought
It's a goose. It's a
goose.
Okay. And it's done very, very well. This book I found on CBC's list of books to be hopeful, or books that are designed to be hopeful. It's sort of a strange choice for that, because this book is like on a dystopian landscape where the main character is sort of going through a war-torn country, and her country is getting torn apart, and she's basically trying to survive and find her way, and then comes across this goose in the early part of her travels and is her companion. So like an interesting book for sure, and it is hopeful towards the end, but it's a melancholy type of hope. So
what's the name of the book again for everyone?
The Capital of Dreams.
The Capital of Dreams. Perfect. You're going to make sure all those books are included in the podcast and video description on YouTube. All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for putting together this trivia game. This was super unexpected, but always really fun when we get something out of the blue like this. I always appreciate when you come on the show.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
That was regular contributor Aamer Khan here with a review of Sadie, as well as this cool little trivia game I wasn't expecting. That's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audiobook Review. AMI Audiobook Review airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours. We also make ourselves easy to find. We're on all the big podcasting platforms, and that includes YouTube. You can email us feedback or any messages you might have at amiaudiobookraeview.ca. You can join us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. It's not just for plugging the next episode, too. We're posting reels and special content on there as well. Thanks for tuning into AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. Happy listening.